Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary, back with another video, and today I'll be talking about the New York Jets from the lens of fantasy football. Who on the Jets is worthwhile to take? We'll go through where they rank and all that fun stuff, but before we get started, just wanted to mention you can follow me on social media at Matt O'Leary NY, and make sure to check out the Just Jets podcast and Just Jets Clips channel for all things podcast related. Okay, so the data I am using is from Fantasy Pros, and essentially what I'm doing is looking at people that would make sense, like you'll see in a second, but the Jets skill position and in terms of fantasy impact and all that stuff. And the reason for it is, well, my fantasy draft is tomorrow, so I've had fantasy football on the brain for a little bit, and I was thinking, who, if any, one on the Jets is draftable. So we'll talk about ADP, which is average draft position, where these guys are going in fantasy drafts on average, and we'll look at the projections. Again, these numbers are from Fantasy Pros, so take that however you want. I'm just presenting the information. So we'll start with the quarterback position. Zach Wilson, where does he rank? Well, his average draft position is 259. So he's projected in 2021 to have 239.3 fantasy points, which puts him at about QB 24. Their projections for him are a 62.5 completion percentage, 3,846 yards, 21 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. Maybe if you want to take a late round flyer and have him as a backup, that's about it. I would say, obviously, if he's projected as QB 24, if you're doing a 12-team league, he's most likely going to be on a roster as a backup. So if you want to do that, then that may make sense, but I don't know if I'd be going out of my way to draft Zach Wilson, and he might not even be a drafted player depending on your league and style and stuff like that. Looking at the running backs, the one that they like the best is Michael Carter. His average draft position ADP was 78. He's projecting 146.5 points this year, which is RB 34. 647 yards and 4 touchdowns is his projection. He's absolutely someone who's going to get drafted in your league. Again, this depends. If you're doing a 6-team league, maybe not. But if you're doing a 10 to 12-team league, he's going to go at some point during the draft. That puts him roughly in the middle of the 6th round, going at 78. So if you want to take a flyer on him, that's fine. I don't think I would touch any of the Jets running backs because I don't think that they're going to, focus on one. I think they're going to rotate him around. Tevin Coleman is the next running back we'll talk about. His ADP is 195, projected at 102.3 fantasy points, RB 51. 504 yards, 4 touchdowns. I don't know how much. Again, I don't know if I'd want to invest in any of these running backs. If I had to pick one, it'd probably be Michael Carter. Ty Johnson's projections are low. ADP 293. 75.1 fantasy points is his projection, which is RB 61. 330 yards, 2 touchdowns is what they are projecting. I think he probably has a little bit of a bigger role than that. But I don't think it's worthwhile to touch him in terms of fantasy value. The only back that I'm looking at maybe taking would be Michael Carter. The wide receivers are interesting. So the ones that they favor, Corey Davis is at the top, ADP 137, 176 points is his projection, which is wide receiver number 48. So 874 yards, 4 touchdowns is what they are projecting. I think it goes a little bit more than that, but Corey Davis is a player that's going to go in fantasy drafts. And I think he likely ends up being the Jets' leading receiver this year. The next guy we're going to talk about has a chance to do so, but I would imagine they're going to rely heavily on Corey Davis. And he had a really good year playing on the same team as Brown, who's going to put up numbers. We know that. So Davis, I think, is a decent wide receiver to have on your roster. I don't know if I'm going out of my way to get him on my roster, but I wouldn't be opposed to taking a guy like Corey Davis. Wide receiver 2 is Elijah Moore. ADP is 150. I like a late round swing on him. I think there is some upside there. I don't know, depending on who's in your league. If it's a lot of Jets fans, then maybe they'll want to get on him. But if it's fans from kind of all over, maybe more Giants fans, then I would absolutely take a late round swing on Elijah Moore and have him on my bench as someone I could potentially plug in. That would be awesome. He's projected to have 146.7 points, wide receiver 64. They're projecting 682 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think it goes a little bit north of that. And if you're someone who thinks it goes very north of that, then I think he's absolutely worthwhile to swing at in the later rounds. Jamison Crowder's up next. His ADP is 220, 133.1 points, wide receiver 70. They're projecting him at 595 yards, 4 touchdowns. He is not going to have the volume that he's had in this offense the last 2 years. So if you're someone who's had him on your fantasy team over the last 2 years and you've liked what he's done, I'm sorry to say, don't go for the three-peat. It's not going to be the same kind of production this year. Keelan Cole's next, ADP 371. They're projecting 99.5 fantasy points this year. Wide receiver 86, 476 yards, 3 touchdowns is their projection. I don't think I would touch Keelan Cole in fantasy. Same thing for Denzel Mims. I don't think I would touch him in fantasy. But his ADP is 264. They're projecting 95.4 points from him. Wide receiver number 89, projecting 478 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think he probably gets a little bit more than that, but I don't see him as like someone that you'd want on your fantasy team. If you're going for anyone in this wide receiver core, it's Davis and Moore. And I think with Moore's upside, I'd probably lean towards him. And then don't touch the Jets defense. I understand that they are going to get a bunch of sacks, but I don't anticipate them being a very high scoring defense. Their ADP is 326. They're projected 91.4 points this year, which is the 27th fantasy defense. Fantasy football likes teams who can intercept passes and score touchdowns and stuff like that, and I don't think that's going to be up the Jets' alley. Yes, they might be ranked higher in sacks, but I don't think you're going to want this Jets defense when they're giving up high 20s, low 30s in points some weeks because their corners are on the weaker side. So that's it. That's my rundown of fantasy players or, people on the Jets roster and where they rank fantasy wise. I always like to stay away from Jets players. Some Jets fans like to get the Jets guys on their team. I always tend to think that I'm a little biased towards the Jets because I'm a fan. So I like to try to go away from getting Jets and separate my brain from my heart, if that makes sense. So let me know what you think. Are you going for any of these guys in your fantasy draft? Once again, I'm Matt O'Leary. Subscribe if you're new. I'll talk to you next time.